Over there's Looe Island, off the dramatic coast of Cornwall. And to say it's got a romantic history is an understatement. You can't move for stories of shipwrecks and pirates and monks and ghosts and treasure maps. Pilgrims frequently lost their lives in these waters on the trip to a chapel on the island, which has now vanished. And legend has it that Jesus Christ himself played on this very beach when he was a little boy. It would have been a great draw for early believers, but true or not, could this island have witnessed the very first rumblings of Christianity in Britain? This is going to be a somewhat challenging time, team, because the tides only give us 5 working hours a day on the island, and marshalling the team is no easy task.
Look at this, he's just half the boat, look. What's he doing?
Found some flint.
I know. So, you reckon we're going to find a prehistoric site down
this
here?
is an omen. Come on.
Here in Looe, we're investigating a story of 2 chapels. In the medieval period, they belonged to Glastonbury Abbey, the important Somerset monastery famous for cultivating the legends of King Arthur and Joseph of Arimathea. And according to local legend, it was Joseph of Arimathea who brought Jesus Christ to Looe Island and left him to play in the safety of these beaches while he went off to do business with Cornish tin merchants.
Looks like this is the east wall here.
Right.
North wall going up there, and then it's...
Stuart thinks he can see its footprint in the earthworks. And there are maps dating back to the 16th century showing a chapel right on top of the hill.
Right, that should be our excavated area in between these strings, so if you want to start stripping the turf off of that, that'll be fine. Thank you, Newt.
So, with time in short supply, Phil's confident enough to get going without geophys results.
Don't know, there might be a wall here. Watch this. Hard.
Yeah.
Hard. Hard.
Yeah.
Soft again.
Looks as if you've got something about there, doesn't it? Presumably these stones sticking through the soil here are a bit of a clue, aren't they?
You're an observant sort of a chap, innit?
Documents suggest that the first thing Glastonbury did when they acquired the site was to build a brand new chapel on the mainland so that pilgrims could celebrate St Michael's Day without losing their lives on the crossing to the island. But here's the puzzle. Because when the site was excavated in the 1930s by Croft Andrew, he thought that Glastonbury just added a chancel to an already existing chapel. But the Second World War cut short his excavations, so we're going to pick up where he left off. Back on the island, we've already found some possible chapel walls.
Just sketched in roughly where that
Yeah,
L-shaped trench is going. So
And Stuart's nose for earthworks has sniffed out what he thinks is a nave for the pilgrims and a chancel for the altar.
you see Phil's getting a bit of a wall coming out through there, which rather suggests that that's probably the first block, with perhaps that added onto it.
Right.
The structures themselves could be the best clue we have when it comes to dating, because chapels don't have the domestic rubbish that we usually rely on to date buildings. Hey, Phil, that trench is coming along, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like we've got the beginnings of a wall, Tony. I mean, we always knew that there were those big stones just immediately underneath the turf, but now we've got it stripped off. You can see there's a nice edge there, but we really need to be able to get down to confirm that that is a wall.
On the other side of the water, we found steps coming down the hillside into the chapel on the mainland, chunky stone walls, and a floor surface carved out of the rock face. It seems to be deliberately terraced into the hillside at exactly the same height as the island chapel. This image of the island chapel suggests that it could have been a single-cell building, a much simpler design than we were expecting.
We've got the wall now. It is bang on east-west.
Right.
Now, the interesting thing now is what is happening in here, because we've got all this. These stones are mortared in, so this is actually masonry.
Right.
Now, what I don't know, and I'm trying to resolve, is whether or not that wall comes along and turns. In other words, we're actually in the northeast corner of the chapel,
yeah,
or whether it's actually a big sort of swelling to take a buttress or a big column that might support a chancel arch.
Like the big stones we've got over here, in fact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now you see down there, Matt had another wall.
Yeah.
Now, we did wonder at one stage whether or not that might be the south wall of the chapel. But now we've actually cleaned it up and looked at it, you can actually see that it's on a slightly different alignment. It's southwest to northeast.
Right.
So I'm rather hopeful, if it worked out all right for me, we'd have a wall coming here, be the northeast corner of the chapel.
Yeah.
This is the chapel. That would be a separate building outside it.
This is such a typical Time Team trench. On day one, when Ian started digging, he came down on this mysterious stone structure. Can you see how it's kind of slanted here? And they all thought, this could be a Bronze Age beehive cairn, maybe with a burial inside it. Very exciting, very, very old. But then, as they came further down, they realised that this was something that had been cut away, that this was actually part of the chapel, and who knows what was here. Maybe it was a supporting column, maybe it was a little tower, and it wasn't until today when Ian finally discovered this mysterious semicircle of stones with this strange staining on it that he realised what it was. It's actually a Victorian flagpole, and he's got a find to prove it.
OK, let's go!
Even as we're loading onto the boat, another kist burial emerges from under the south wall. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, Tiny.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers, you're welcome.
It's beginning to look like this enclosure could have been a burial ground for thousands of years, maybe even into prehistory.
Bye.
Over the last few days, we've discovered that the story of our two chapels began long before Glastonbury's monks arrived, when Looe Island could well have been one of the earliest outposts of Christianity. And a chapel on the top would have been a beacon of hope for traders from the Mediterranean crossing formidable seas. Sometime later, another chapel was built on the mainland, at the same height, looking to the island, with our reliquary box at the altar for pilgrims to visit. And eventually, in the 12th century, Glastonbury's monks rebuilt both the chapels as a sort of St. Michael theme park.
Join a thriving worldwide community of Time Team fans on Patreon.
Our new target is to reach 15,000 worldwide supporters on Patreon by the end of 2025. This will enable us to continue expanding the Time Team world with more digs and greater access than ever before.
On top of the cliffs, the search for the Iron Age village continues. Phil's still trying to locate a roundhouse, and he's now extended the trench to see if these rock features are indeed part of a structure.
That makes a lot of sense, widening and lengthening that a bit, doesn't it, to get it clearer?
Yeah, at the moment we can't actually see the curving arc of the ditch.
But if it's wide...
But although we may be lacking firm evidence of a roundhouse, John's convinced he's found the edge of the village.
Yeah, I mean, it looks as though we've reached the limit, in this direction at any rate, of the ring ditches.
Right.
And it's just possible there's a sort of boundary that's coincidental.
Yeah, that's what really interests me, John, that boundary ditch, because it then continues further on. But if the boundary ditch is contemporary with those houses, then I think that gives us a much better chance of dating the houses than stuff you'll find inside them.
My thought was to put a trench that looks at the interior again, a second look, goes from that possible hearth feature across the ring ditch and also over the boundary, so along that line.
So Francis is opening a new trench in the upper field to see if we can locate another roundhouse, and to see if that structure is built up against the boundary ditch. It should also increase our chances of finding some dating evidence. In the lower field, Matt's trench is starting to look like a house, or so he tells me. And the finds are tantalising.
This is another one of these imported exotics. I don't recognise the specific type, although I do recognise that we've had identical material from Tintagel, which is the known type site here in Cornwall, which is only a few miles up the coast.
So where do you think it's imported from?
It's most likely to come from Turkey in the 5th or 6th centuries.
Right, that's post-Roman.
Yes, yes.
This is fantastic, our first link to the Mediterranean. And just as importantly, it looks as if this structure was used by local people from the early Roman period until 200 years after the Romans had left Britain.
The geophysics showed this huge ring in this field here, and this is the ring here. It's this ditch.
Ah, so that is actually that.
Yeah, it goes all the way around like that. So now I'm walking into the house, and you can see that the soil is kind of going this dark grey colour, especially around here. That's because there's so much charcoal in here. And we found some burnt animal bone up there as well, so I mean, there's just their rubbish all over the floor, really.
Is this the wall on the other side?
Now, according to the geophysics, the ditch there, the wall ditch, should go round behind you and should be at the other end of the trench there. So this should be about the centre of the house.
So is this the hearth that's producing all the charcoal and burnt material?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Right.
You've got finds in the finds tray?
Yep, there's some great stuff out of here.
And there's another bit down there?
Yep, there's another bit in situ down there, you can see. That's a bit of amphora.
So these are these big wine or oil storage jars, and this is coming from the East Mediterranean then?
Yep, that's post-Roman as well, that's 5th or 6th century.
So if this isn't my outside wall, where is the other outside wall?
Well, according to the geophysics, it should be right about the other end of the trench there.
Right here somewhere?
Yep.
Raksha, can you stand up for a sec? And the other wall is where Raksha is. If that's right, it's a heck of a big building, Mick.
It's a huge building, especially if it's producing material like this post-Roman stuff. That's really exciting.
Why would it be so significant if it was that sort of date?
Because we don't get structures that are sort of post-Roman very often, particularly with the finds associated with them.
And this is the so-called Dark Ages because we don't know very much about it.
Usually because we can't tell her of that period because we haven't got the finds to go with them.
So if this is 5th or 6th century, then this could actually be illuminating the Dark Ages, which isn't a bad job for tomorrow, is it? It would seem Phil's now confident enough to say that there is a building in his trench and it's roughly the same date as Francis's roundhouse. The trouble for me with a trench like this is all I can see are these great stripes of natural rock with this gritty stuff in between. And then down here, a great tumble of stuff. It's hard to imagine that anyone ever actually lived here. It just all looks so bleak until you come up with something like this, which Phil just found. And it's so crisp. It could have been made 25, 50 years ago. But Phil, this is actually Iron Age, isn't it?
Oh, most certainly it is. I mean, we found it with all the Iron Age pottery. It's a spindle whorl. It's a natural stone with a perfect hole just drilled right the way through it. And they would have used it to spin their yarn. I mean, what you have is you have a stick coming through there and you attach the wool to the top and you literally drop it and at the same time you spin it. And this weight allows the momentum of the spindle whorl to keep going so you can tease out your yarn.
Do you get the same sense of relief as I do, that at last we've come up with something that belonged to a tangible human being who was living in the landscape?
Well, that's right. I mean, it would have been presumably a woman who would have actually been making wool or making taking the wool to make yarn for garments. And although we haven't got the piece of stick, and although we haven't got the yarn, we haven't got the woolen garments, we know they existed simply because we got this.
Over in Matt's trench, we still can't figure out what this not very round house is doing here.
Looks like there could be 2 pieces actually in there as well.
They do.
Now that's the same 5th and 6th century stuff that we had from this trench before.
This is really high status stuff. I mean, it would have had wine or olive oil in it. But, I mean, you just don't find this sort of thing on most British sites. And, I mean, to find one really fresh sherd, it hasn't been lying around for long. So that's got straight into the ground. And there's another one directly underneath it.
Let's get that bit out as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're from the same pot. What's the betting I can get them to join?
I'll get you a drink if you can sort it out. Oh,
there you go.
Oh, I owe you a pint.
You owe me a pint, Matt. Yes, beautiful.
I'm glad we've got an experienced archaeologist on this dig. Back in the upper field, a jubilant Francis has found his target. I've no idea how he can tell from this rather manky trench, but I know he's going to show me.
Well, in some respects, I think this is part of a key to the site. That little depression where Ian's working is, in fact, a ditch. And there's another ditch here, and those 2 ditches mark the edge of a droveway.
You say a droveway, what are they driving along it?
Sheep and cattle, probably. Now, if you look at where this droveway is going to and from, at that end, over there, it starts just this side of those cottages.
Yeah.
Okay, now all the way around this bay, you've got open grazing on the edges of the cliffs and the rocks. So you probably had thousands of sheep and cattle out there, and then they were taken in, probably in the autumn, along this droveway, and then beyond them, over there, you've got a large animal field or stock enclosure. Now, if you look at the edge of the settlement, it's going round like that, and then like that, in two distinct arcs. And I think that arc is defining the edge of that stockyard, making it a usable shape. And similarly, this is defining the edge of an arable field, and those two arable fields are precisely the same size, which is what you need if you're a farmer.
What about the date?
Now, that's a tricky one. We know that this droveway is in a terrace that was ground down by animals' hooves over hundreds of years, probably. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if this droveway didn't begin in the Bronze Age, then go on into the Iron Age when it was formalised by the ditches. So, for all we know, there could be 1,000 years of settlement on this hillside.
Although we didn't find any proof to link our two fields, we now believe the whole site probably evolved over many hundreds of years from a Bronze Age farming community into one of the small but bustling late Iron Age trading centres scattered around the Cornish coast, meeting the demands for local commodities as the Roman Empire expanded. After the Romans disappeared in the 5th century, merchants would have continued to call in occasionally with their exotic goods, until the Byzantine Empire faded several hundred years later.
If you'd like to see more episodes like this, you can make it happen.
Our new target is to reach 15,000 worldwide supporters on Patreon by the end of 2025. This will enable us to continue expanding the Time Team world. Enjoy front row seats for the greatest show on Earth and under it.
Cornwall. Behind one of the wildest and most romantic coastlines in Britain lies Bodmin Moor. Barren, windswept, and dominated by huge, craggy tors. Weird granite outcrops that have been sculpted by millions of years of harsh Cornish weather. This is a landscape that's been witness to thousands of years of human history. A recent archaeological survey recorded hundreds of prehistoric settlements here. But no one can say for sure how old they are, or even if they're all the same age. We're beginning our dig in the doorway. And the first challenge for us is working out which of these stones are part of the original walls, which stones are rubble, and which stones are just stones. If these were Bronze Age buildings, they would have looked like this. Low stone walls with timber beams forming a conical roof, which would have been covered in turf or even hides. If it was a house, there would have been a hearth in the middle for the family fire. I say if, because 10 years ago, the Bodmin Moor survey assumed all the house circles here were Bronze Age. But now, at last, we're getting to grips with these stone circles. We've got trenches open in 2 separate buildings, and it would be fantastic if they were both part of the same potential Bronze Age village.
I was looking in the topsoil over the other side of the trench, and I've come across this bit of green glass and this piece of vessel rim.
Oh, right.
It looks a bit suspicious to me for the prehistoric or post-medieval periods.
Well, this is going to throw a cat in among the pigeons, because this is Roman glass. It's the rim and then the shoulder with a little piece of white trail slip along the bottom.
Oh, I see. It is a little bit lighter just there.
That's, well, it's very rare for Cornwall, and I'd say it's about 2nd or 3rd century AD, which is a great surprise. I got to admit, I hadn't expected to find Roman glass out here in the middle of Bodmin Moor.
The first really juicy find from these house circles, and it's definitely not Bronze Age. But it does suggest that Roman tourists or pilgrims might have come up here to visit these ancient ruins, anything from 1,000 to 3,000 years after the buildings went out of use.
You'll have to deturf by hand because...
Raksha's now opening our 3rd trench in the house circles.
Go for it.
This is the first structure we've dug that hasn't been excavated before, and we've got great hopes for the finds here. From this work on Bodmin Moor, Ben and Henry have been able to track how man has changed this landscape. 10,000 years ago, in Mesolithic times, hunter-gatherers would have roamed through forests here, searching for food and shelter. 3,000 years later, at the dawn of the Neolithic period, they began to choose places to settle and cleared this landscape to graze their animals. A few thousand years later still, in the Bronze Age, they began to farm on a big scale, clearing even more of the woodland. It's just after lunch on our final day, and at last something's come up in Trench 3 that could focus this whole dig. It's a small sherd of pottery. And this could be the first piece of evidence that puts our house circle firmly into the Bronze Age.
Carl, I'm so excited about this because this is the first piece of pottery we've had in this trench.
Well, I think you're very right to be excited. This is Bronze Age pottery. It's what we call Trevisca ware here in Cornwall. It dates from the Middle Bronze Age, so yes, this is a very exciting piece. And I've just noticed on the interior, if you look carefully, you can see the black area.
Yeah.
That's actually internal residue, and that's the last meal that was cooked in this pot.
So we're thinking it's about 1500.
Yeah, it's around about 1500 BC.
It's odd that something that looks so insignificant can tell us so much. This piece of Cornish Trevisca ware confirms this was a Bronze Age home. And what's more, we know they were cooking here 3,500 years ago. This is the first time that anyone's been able to confirm that this is a Bronze Age village, which is a great achievement. And our environmental team can add to the story. There's no evidence in the pollen analysis that our Bronze Age farmers grew any crops up here. It seems they carried on clearing the trees for fuel, and over the centuries, the soil became too acidic to support anything else. It would seem that unwittingly, generation after generation of Bronze Age people were responsible for changing the face of Bodmin Moor forever. Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses, and behind-the-scenes insights.